Let's discuss a recent tragedy in the US. In Boulder, Colorado. It's being treated as a terror attack and an anti Semitic hate crime by the FBI. The suspect, Mohammed Suleiman, was throwing Molotov cocktails at a crowd of people who were gathering in solidarity with the Israeli hostages captured by Hamas. 12 people have been injured. Tom, this is an incredibly serious, basically anti-Semitic hate crime, and not very long off the back of another one, the back of the killing of two Israeli embassy staffers in Washington DC. What have you made of this?
It's so incredibly disturbing. Feels like the reins are off
Mm.
where anti-Semitism is concerned. I always think it's a marker of a civilized society that anti-Semitism, the world's oldest hatred, the world's most destructive hatred historically, it's a mark of civilization that you keep that in its box, you keep that in its place. It's been unleashed now. And
Yeah.
I think we're seeing that in America. We're certainly seeing that across Europe, where barely a week goes by without there being some sort of assault, some sort of synagogue being vandalized, anti-Semitic graffiti, and all the rest of it. As you say, coming so quickly off the back of those Israeli embassy staff being shot at in Washington, D.C. I mean, this is Jew hatred in its most violent and purified form. It's horrendous that we've ever got to this point. I think anyone who was running around an American university campus or a London demonstration talking about globalizing the Intifada, this is exactly what it looks like. And whilst, of course, the only person responsible for this horrendous attack is the suspect himself, we can't ignore the broader context, which is that Jew hatred, dressed up very loosely as opposition to Israel, has become normalized, has become promoted. There's a hysteria out there, a hate-filled hysteria, and this is just one of the more extreme expressions of it. And you just wonder how bad it's going to get before actual moves are taken to get on top of this. Here in this country, in the wake of just the immediate aftermath of October 7th, there was an almost 100% rise in anti-Semitic assaults. I'm not talking about people saying horrible things on the internet, actual assaults. In this country, Jews were, before October the 7th, a tiny proportion of the population, yet make up a quarter of all of the religiously motivated hate crimes. And if you think about how much that's been fueled since, it really does boggle the mind. So another reason to take this incredibly seriously, to dismiss the idea that this is all just misdirected anger about the policies of the state of Israel. This is anti-Semitism in its most violent and kind of ancient form, I think, and it's something that we've really got to. And anyone who believes in any form of basic decency and civilization needs to take a stand against.
Definitely. And Free Palestine was chanted by both suspects in DC and in Boulder. Liam, I mean, there are people who will still deny there's any anti-Semitic component to this movement. I mean, of course, it's possible to be pro-Palestine and not anti-Semitic, but this hatred attends that movement. It's undeniable, surely.
Yeah, I'd put this in the. I mean, I agree with everything we've just heard from Tom there. I'd put this in the context of a sort of broader geopolitics. Just to round off, we really are in a situation where it used to be the economy stupid. Now it's sort of the geopolitics stupid. Just think about how the sort of fallout from the Middle East is affecting the economy. For instance, the Suez Canal is basically closed.
Yeah.
That's absolutely incredible. And I'm sorry to make this, pecuniary and about commerce, not disregarding the human tragedy we're discussing here at all, but just to give you guys another sort of angle on this. These geopolitical conflicts have enormous economic spillover effects, and they reverberate around the world. I mean, it's almost become normalized that the Suez Canal is now non-operational.
Yeah.
That is feeding inflation around the world. That's really pushing back the development of major parts of the world. We've had this canal since the middle of the mid to late 19th century.
Yeah.
And now it's being basically held hostage by a bunch of Houthi rebels. They're funded as a direct, though indirect, result of the conflict that we're talking about here, that was then spilling over into American politics. And we're seeing it here too, aren't we? We're seeing overseas conflicts being played out on the streets of the UK.
Yeah.
I mean, where does this end? It's no wonder that the calls are rising for ever more defence spending, and it could go much higher. Just as we were preparing for this discussion, we're hearing from senior American officials that the UK needs to be raising its defence spending to 5% of GDP. We're going to struggle to get it to 3% of GDP. So, we're sitting here in the Western world, and we're, having great thoughts about all the geopolitical conflicts and so on, and yet we're seeing on our own streets, in our own suburbs and cities, the terrible implications of these geopolitical conflicts being borne out. And yet we can't afford, the extra defense spending that would, see us get more involved in these conflicts in order to try and resolve them. And we're getting to a point where a lot of mainstream people, and this really a bit of a counsel of despair, would say, well, a lot of these conflicts are because we've been in too much involved in the past. So it's a real conundrum.
Finally, I think that's one thing about the way in which anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism have become basically indistinguishable at this point. I think it's really important to hammer that home. Of course, people can be pro-Palestinian and not anti-Semitic, but the two have become so bound up. I always go back to this great Howard Jacobson quote when Tim Black interviewed him for Spiked a few years ago. He said, people always say, I'm critical of Israel. I'm critical of Israel. He said, you're not critical of Israel. You're hysterical about Israel. I think now that hysteria is leading people to actually try and murder people on the streets of Western nations. So it's something that we really need to take this seriously, recognise what has happened here. This is not clearly born out of a desire for Palestinian statehood or anything else. There is a violent anti-Semitic hysteria which has been let loose, and that we've really got to roll our sleeves up to put it back in that box that it needs to be kept in my view.